Okay. Thanks so much, Jean, for being able to participate and contribute to this research.
My honor.
Thank you. So if we start with the first question, what does collective thrivability mean to you?
It's, in some ways so hard to answer because I've been struggling to define that since 2007.
Well, you live it, right? You are a living example of that. Yeah, some say it began with you.
Pretty close.
Yeah.
Pretty close. When I started, there were two people that had mentioned it. Somebody in Australia and the person who mentioned it to me. And that was all on a Google search that would produce any feedback.
And I'd love to hear from you as well why you leave out the E. So maybe that's another way to come into that, Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I debated at the time, and I think I bought both domains for a while. And I just felt like it was more grammatically correct to take out the E.
Yeah.
And just looked better to me.
Yes.
That's like true. With the E, I wanted to put a dash in the middle. Thrive, dash, ability.
Yes, it does. It's more coherent. Yeah.
So usually when people ask me, what do you mean by collective thrivability? I turn it on them and I say, like, well, what do you think it means?
Yeah.
Because it's not just living in me, like it's living in all of us, and it's all of our sensing on what it means. And also I want people to think about it themselves and develop their own relationship to it.
Yeah.
And one of the simplest ways that I've come to think about it is generating more than you consume. But it's generating what? Like generating, more of the world that we want, more resources and assets than we're consuming or extracting.
Yeah. So maybe rather than being focused on the word, the vision behind that. So what was the vision that was living in you that gave rise and birth to the word?
Yeah. I had been, at that point in 2007, I had been trained as a life coach. So I was working with people on what is the best life for them. Like they're high achievers. How can they do even better or more? I was also involved in a lot of social entrepreneurship and social change. But I couldn't find any specific project that was mine. It was like human rights matters a lot, animal rights, the environment, like all of these things mattered to me.
Yeah.
And none of them were mine. And so when I heard thrivability, these two things happened for me. One, I thought, this is what coaching the whole world would be. What is the best self for the world? And it strives towards that. Gives us something to aim for. And then the other piece was, it's the umbrella, right? What happens if we get to the human rights that we want? What does the world look like if we have the environmental movement and actions that we want? What happens when we're taking care of the forms of life and the materials of the planet together? There's no word to really describe that, right? Like, is it harmony or flourishing or whatever? And so the ability to thrive felt like it was this umbrella term under which all of these other activities that I thought were important and interconnected could be held.
Yes, and it's amazing. Look how many years later now, and what it has come to mean for so many people. Yeah. Okay, that's very interesting because that connects them very deeply with a vision also of our own humanity and the possibilities of really our true actualization, isn't it?
Yes. Well, and in some ways, thrivability is never achievable or knowable.
Yeah.
Right? How could we ever measure against all time to know if this moment was more thrivable than another?
Yeah.
You can't, because nature often consumes a whole bunch of resources in order to level up to the next stage. And so even if in the moment it seems like it's a downhill slide, it's part of a larger uphill trend. And so just trying your best to sense into each moment and go, does it feel like this is moving towards more thrivability, and trusting that collectively enough of us are sensing and moving in that direction? Clearly, if humans die out, that might not be the most thrivable thing for humans.
Yeah.
Be the most thrivable thing for the universe.
Exactly. Yes. So would you say it's really life intrinsic then? And intrinsic, life intrinsic and intrinsic to life. Do you feel there is a deeper wisdom or almost the intentionality within life for it to blossom, flourish, thrive?
I phrase it as the impulse of the universe to I can-ness.
Yeah.
Like, if it can, it will.
Yeah.
And if it can't, it'll build up resources until it can. Just kind of like, the water trying to overcome some edge, right? It just adds more water until it overflows that edge. Like, the universe just has this impulse towards I can-ness. But it's not just a life energy movement. Like, atoms and molecules are also moving in that direction, not just living systems moving in that direction. They're just doing what they can.
Yes. Yes. So the canness has a deeper purpose? Is it purposeful for you in any way? In of itself?
There is a layer at which I'm totally an absurdist about that. Like, not really. There's a way in which I'm like, yeah, it totally feels like that, right? And it gives meaning and value to believe that it does.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting. So from that, could you explain or share a little bit how your work supports then transformational change? We're now going to give you the direction for our collective thrivability. And we've just undefined it in some way. So maybe you get the intention of the question.
So it's interesting that you're connecting in transformational change for me, because there's another avenue of my life that pulls in transformation work.
Yeah.
And so I worked in the field of philanthropy for, 5-7 years, something like that. And I worked with a woman named Tracy Gary, who wrote the book Inspired Philanthropy. And she's been working since the early 70s to get women involved in philanthropy, training women up to believe that they are competent and capable enough to be great philanthropists. And then how do you do that? How do you do your annual giving well? And then how do you move into legacy stuff? And so she was part of a group on transformational philanthropy. And it was a beautiful place to see systems thinking being applied, right? Because it was like, where is the best place to put money that has transformational change in the world?
Yeah.
And it was an interesting experience to be in there, not being a philanthropist myself. Having the kinds of resources that I was like, oh yeah, I could throw a few $1 million at that. No. So getting trained to think that way without having the resources to be that way has been quite interesting for me. But I thought a lot about what are the forms of social change that we're engaged in, and how do those catalyze transformational change? Like, there's so much, the metaphor of like the baby in the river?
Yeah.
Everybody's trying to get the babies out of the river. Then some people are like, where are these babies coming from? Got to go upriver, find where the baby's coming from. And in the end, you get to this, like, what is the culture that allows babies to be thrown into a river? Yeah. And so many of the people that I was in that conversation on transformational philanthropy were at that layer of like, how do we transform culture so that we're not considering throwing babies in the river, torturing animals, ruining the environment? Like, how do we infect change at that layer?
So
and that also got me interested in worldview stuff around like, so much of this transformation seems to do with engaging in people that can believe the world could be good for all of us.
Yeah.
Because many people are trapped in it's either me or you, so I'm going to make sure it's me. And then they can't move into a space of like, let's take care of it at a different layer in the system. So
Okay.
Should pause there and let you ask your next question.
No, it's good. I mean, I'm, as you're sharing, I'm sensing into that as well. And when I'm listening, images come to my mind. That's how my being plays with your words. And it's because when you started, it's like an appealing to go to the root conditions of, first of all, what we don't want, to then transform it into what is beneficial and meaningful for all of us, right? So would you say that in this way of working with your transformational change, this has been healing as well?
Yeah, healing is fascinating, right? Yeah, so there's a phase that I went through where I was very interested in the 5 stages of grief, or whatever stages you want to expand that into, and felt pretty solidly like all of us are in various states of grief.
Yeah.
And that personally, socially, and collectively. And that transformation really will happen when we start to do some healing to those wounds, because people can't operate at the level I would like them to create the world we want when they're in
that's right.
pain, because then they're resistant or acting out or whatever.
Yes. So in what way does your work support that healing?
I don't know that I have produced work that's all that healing. I've thought a lot about the grief modules, and then like 2 years later, Nicholas Taleb, no, it wasn't Taleb, it was Zizek. Zizek comes out, spitting about stuff about grief, and I was like, yes, exactly that. Somebody else has taken that stick. So I don't. Mine tends to be healing more around the vision, around people being. Lots of people who are stuck in sustainability going, oh, I could yearn for something more. I'm so wounded by what's happened that I've been only striving for just a little because I've lost faith that we could aim even higher than that. But lots of sustainability people are even resistant to doing that, right? They're like, how dare you believe that the world could be so much better.
Yeah, but some of them are stuck in an activism and a negativism, and a rejection of society, rather than an embracing all of it, garbage and all, and repurpose it, upcycle it, and remind it of what it can be.
What were you saying?
And remind it of what it can become by bringing consciousness into that and love into that.
I remember mentioning thrivability to somebody who is like frat boy that went into, was good Christian business guy. And I was like, here's somebody who's kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum from a bunch of the activists I know. And he loved it. He loved the idea of thrivability, and it resonated with him at a spiritual level. And I was like, that's magical.
Yes.
Because sustainability doesn't do that. It kind of isolates to a particular social group, and then it becomes us, theming, and naming and blaming. But thrivability, I found to be somewhat uniting across different political and social divides, and that's felt powerful.
Yes, and it has a very different image in people's mind when you use the words. I've often found if you use sustainability, people imagine a flat line where you're going to sustain that. And when you work with thrivability, there is this blossoming, this opening up, this unfolding, this emergence, and there is growth possible. Whereas for us, a lot of in the sustainability, it's anti-growth.
Yeah, well, and at least in the U.S., I can't speak globally, but at least in the U.S., there's a little bit of a, you've been naughty.
Yes, it's
we've been naughty, and now we must, take our lashings, make our sacrifices.
Yeah.
And it's like there's a whole bunch of people to which that doesn't engage at all.
No, exactly. And that may bring me down to the next question. So what systemic barriers did you encounter in this work? on the personal, the organizational, and also the collective levels?
Such a rich question. Can I hold all the thoughts at once? Let's see. So personally, I mean, aren't we most attached to the thing that's our hardest challenge, right? And so my own thrivability has been hard. I have stuff that I need to heal from. I have darkness. I've had real trauma. I've been diagnosed with PTSD. Right? Like there's dark stuff there to overcome. Although I often find the darker it is, the easier it is to strive for thrivability. Like, just kind of want to skip the middle. Like, why do mediocre?
Yes.
If you're trying to get out of the darkness, you might as well go for something really worthwhile.
Yeah.
So that's a piece of it. And then, having worked some in philanthropy, I did not want to play games around chasing after funding and like spending 50% of my time doing applications to grants and then justifying each project and whatever. And so what I chose to do was, and then I also didn't want to sell out and have it be completely commercialized. Oh, I trademarked it and now nobody can use it without me, and here's my little program. And like, I didn't want to do that to it because it meant something in the world. And so what I had to do was, I'll earn money over here doing this stuff.
Yeah.
And I'll self-fund my own work over here doing this stuff, and occasionally do a little round of crowdfunding for people who just believe in me and will pitch in some funds.
Yes.
And so a piece of my personal thrivability is like trying to manage this dance of honoring the thing for what it is, not wasting my time chasing the wrong funding streams, and then also doing well enough in myself to be an embodiment of the thing. And trying to keep circling on what is the right balance of those for me. And also like trying to grow it to other people and not own it in myself. Like it's so great that there is a network of people who are now involved in this. And so trying to think through building a movement that would transcend me, and when is the moment that I need to step back or out so that more of it can pop up and grow. And so I feel like I'm in that phase now where I'm trying not to be too visible so that all of the other people who have come in can kind of lift.
Amazing. Yes.
So that's at the personal layer. And I mean, we could go down lots of details on the personal layer, but we can stop for now. What was the next layer that you wanted me to address?
That when people are given the opportunity or reminded that they can thrive. Yeah. Sometimes people, instead of embracing it, they get scared of it. So there can be a barrier there as well. It's almost like sometimes when people, you give them the option. So what if you could be truly happy? Would you do that now? Or what if your problem could actually be resolved? And
don't get me started on happiness. I'm not a fan of happiness.
Yeah. So maybe go there.
You do want me to go there into what's the problem with happiness?
Sure, let's see what comes up.
There's a blog post that I did that says, if you want to be happy, come give me a bunch of your belongings. I will beat you for 3 days. And then at the end, I'll give you a few of your things back and I'll stop beating you. You will be very happy. Like, happiness is an utterly relevant experience, so it's like relative to what you've had. And it's fleeting. Like 2 days later, you've now habituated to the new state. And so I don't understand the striving for happiness stuff.
But that's also, I think, a lot of when people are striving for pleasure, right? And if they think happiness is pleasure, then we're in trouble.
Yeah, who's the guy that did all the positive psychology stuff? He has a TED Talk, and he goes through different layers of, happiness stuff. And he's like, there's the pure pleasure, the hedonic pleasure, and that stuff you habituate to very quickly.
Yeah.
And then the second one I think he talks about is flow states. So Mihai Csikszentmihalyi stuff on flow. The trick with that stuff is you're happy and you don't know it.
Yeah.
When you're in a real state of flow, you have no self-awareness, and therefore you're not conscious that you're happy about it. And then the third one he talks about is being on purpose.
Okay.
But this weird thing is you can be on purpose and kind of miserable.
Mm-hmm.
But you're happy that you're on purpose. But you might be, like you're exercising and you're experiencing lots of pain in your muscles, but you're happy that you're, growing your body and making your body healthier. And so that one has a weird double edge to it of you might be in discomfort in some way, but there's a joy of being on purpose. And so I'm more interested in that. I'm more interested in satisfaction.
That touches on thrivability too. Because sometimes people are thriving and they don't know it. So they're in the process, but they don't see it at all. Yeah. Other people may realize, but you're really growing, and they just go, oh no, don't tell me that. Yeah.
This is growth. I don't like
it. Exactly. And then, there's ways in which that touches on thrivability, I think, as well.
Well, and the other thing is the striving for as if it's like again, a flat line. Like I want to get to that plateau and then I want to stay there in this state.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is about the movement between these things and finding the place in which you thrive is in motion, not in some.
Yeah. But we are so conditioned to grasp experiences. So if we think that life is about experiences, life is about experiences, then you want to accept the ones you like and you reject the ones that you don't like. So you're constantly stuck. But there's a whole lot more behind. It's way beyond experience.
There's also some interesting research on the experience of pain, and that they did the study on what do you call it when you get a colonoscopy, right?
Yes.
And so it's like they were measuring the pain of the experience, and they discovered that if you might have a lot more pain in the overall experience, but if the last experience that you have was of very little pain, that's what you will remember. It wasn't that bad.
Wow.
But if you tried to keep it at a kind of steady degree of pain and it ended at that kind of like steady degree, that was worse because what they remembered was it was painful.
Yeah.
So it's not the overall flow of the experience. It's like, what is the memory that gets captured in the final experience of it?
Yes.
That seems to have mattered.
Let's zoom in on. Yes. So as we're exploring then these barriers, yes? Are some of these barriers then also conceptual in how we hold it?
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Very much so.
And in order, does naming that help in any way? Getting conscious of that help in any way?
It does for me, and seems somewhat intuitive for people that I've worked with on it. But I don't have any data. Like I haven't done a ton of experiments myself that would produce some clear data stream about how successful that is.
Yes. Okay.
Right. I'm more just in a sensing and testing mode than I am in a.
Yes.
And we reflect on whether that works.
And for people who are opening to their thrivability, but they're working in organizations that are just designed completely the opposite, counterintuitive, not human. I've trained in a few of those. And I've noticed if people become more aware of their potential for thrivability, they become more miserable at the same time for the lack of the opportunity to live that where they are.
So the constraints are inspiring.
They feel really constrained and now become conscious that they're constrained, and they become conscious of the entrapments. So they in some ways feel even more frustrated and angry. And it's a very challenging moment because some of them almost wish they were ignorant of it. Because now it's painful to see it so clearly if you don't know how to get out of it. Because they still feel...
I've had that moment.
You've had that moment. So what would you say to them?
There's a story by Voltaire, I think, about who's better off, the wise man or the fool? And I've gone, I understand. I understand why this is a genuine question.
Yes. That's right.
The fool can be blissfully unaware.
Yeah.
Therefore, more easily content.
Yeah.
But your question was, what would I say to them?
Yeah, because they are experiencing that barrier. In the sense that they come to a point as if they grow any further, they so cannot fit into that system anymore. That in some ways they now consciously hold back on their own potential to thrive.
Right. Two things come up for me. One is now his name is slipping my mind. I was just talking about him the other day. The man who survived the Holocaust and wrote about how between stimulus and response, there's like a window for your inner self to make a choice about how you're going to respond. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Can you share a little bit more?
Pardon?
Share a little bit more about that if you can.
So whatever the world is giving you, right, you're getting stimulated by that thing.
Yes.
If you're conscious, then there's a moment between that stimulus and when you respond, in which you get to choose how you respond. Yes. How do you take that in? What story do you tell yourself about it?
Yes.
And so in that moment, there is choice.
Yeah.
So even if you're living through a Holocaust situation, right, in that moment, there is choice. And so if he can make that choice in that moment, whatever you're going through, you can make a choice in that moment. Yes. And so that's a piece of it to me, is you have that moment of choice. How am I going to choose to interpret this? What story am I going to tell myself? And what can I do? Yeah. And then the other piece that comes up for me is trickster.
Yeah.
Like if you hold it heavily, then it's hard to respond because you can't tolerate the conditions. But if you hold it as trickster, it's like, where is there room to play? Mm. You know, so if I'm talking to my child about how, I don't like this teacher in school and it's hard, like, what can you do to play with that? Like, this is your situation that you get to make up. How are you going to make that fun or interesting for yourself? It's like, we as adults need to remember to do that too. Okay, so these are the barriers. How am I going to work within those? How am I going to amuse myself? How am I going to amuse other people? Like, what little things can I play with in order to do something that at least I'm amused by?
Yes, so that means that you then have the capacities to somehow continue to express your inner system and not let the outer system impact on those choice points, right? So
yeah, I mean, it's like the person's driving you nuts. Draw a mustache on their face. I mean, you're still talking to them, but like you're drawing.
Yes, I sometimes tell them, if you see a very angry person, visualize them as a little baby, you know. So just change the imagery.
Yes. Have fun with it.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's the holding it heavy that breaks us.
Yeah, it does. It does. Yes, that's interesting. And then, so that's nice because we just went into the next question, how you're able to transform or transcend these barriers. So you just touched on two, the way you hold those choice moments, the lightness that you can maintain.
Playfulness. It's just so... Playfulness is where creativity is generated. Playfulness is one of the ways to get past barriers between us, like worldview barriers.
Yeah.
Just it lightens up the space and enables us to find new options.
Because in the two case studies where I went into, where I trained in very heavy organizations, one in schools and one in a bank. This is what they felt was most missing, the participants. So the students were saying, well, playfulness, look, I just have to sit for these exams and I just have to replicate only for the exams, and there's no questions I can ask, there's no experiential learning, it's not fun, it's not playful, and it's not meaningful. And in the people working for the bank, they just felt they had to execute tasks that were given to them. They could not think outside the box. It was just from A to B, follow the procedure as if you are a machine. And both of them were linked to sort of this sense that the purpose of the system was to become profitable and economized.
Yeah, which is not very human.
It's not at all. No, exactly. So when we're working with those kind of barriers, is there any additional advice you have for that? When the activities that people have been given to carry out, be that at school, be it at work, go contrary to everything that makes us flourish and human and thrive.
Well, in a large part, it depends on the person. So somebody is a visual learner and they're artistic, then the drawing on faces is going to be fun and at least distract them for the moment. Somebody else might be like, well, I wonder how I could make it even more efficient. Like, okay, if you're going to be the system designer here, how could you make that even more so? Like, take it to its logical conclusion or whatever. If you're a physical person, like maybe it's about dancing in the space or, imagining a hopscotch board on the way, from one point to another, or like you have to sense into what is your way of being and learning in the world. And so you have to kind of match for your sensing, which is the best strategy for you. So it might be, oh, well, we have to get it all done. We have to move this down the line like gears in a wheel. So why don't we get some music out and make, dance to a rap song, because we'll get it done even faster then, right? Like that's the kind of like transformational work that can happen. I'd really be actually interested in doing work on sound and how sound can help a group be more coherent and efficient together, because they get in sync by the beat to their heart, and so everybody gets into that same.
Yes, that's right. Yes, and in both places there is no openness to introduce that. I've tried.
But you can give it to people, and so they can, I know lots of songs by heart. I can be singing the song inside my head. I don't need to have it playing out loud to be able to like.
So I see that in your strategy, you always keep a freedom inside. That no matter what the constraints are out, there is a place there where they can't touch and they can't impose. So you can create it from within. Yes.
And the trick is that laughter.
Oh, yeah. That's right. And it's like, the more they challenge that, the more creative that gets.
That's right. That's your opportunity to be more creative.
Yes. Very good. So for people to find that within them, that they can really play. Yes. Yeah.
Right. And the only result from that is that it's not as heavy on you to experience. It's a win.
Yeah.
Like it might not have actually changed the thing out there, but it changed your experience of it and stopped draining your energy.
Yeah.
And you found a way to fill your energy so that when you left that situation and went home, you weren't frustrated with your partner, you weren't frustrated with your kids, right? Like changing your energy matters a lot.
Yes, and that's good, because that touches also on the next question. What would you say are the most important factors and the conditions that need to be present for humanity? Let me go much bigger, to avoid irreversible collapse of our life support systems and also the breakdown of these social, cultural, and ecological fabrics.
Yeah, I feel like I have multiple answers to this. There's a set of people to who I feel like the response needs to be, so what? So what if humanity collapses? So what if, there's some giant environmental collapse? Okay. Like, the planet Earth is most likely to continue. The universe is going to continue. Like, if you believe in God, God is going to keep experimenting and playing around. So why are you holding it so heavy that you have to be harsh with other people or in friction mode, right? Instead of in creative mode. And so if you let go of the pressure, then you can be like, okay, so I've given this window. I want to make some effort, right? I feel in my heart called to make an effort. So how can I play in that to change the outcome instead of, it's all coming to an end. If I don't do something, the entire world is going to explode.
Yeah.
Which
is real later in the line anyway. When we, in the bigger cosmic scheme of things, this planet will come to an end. So, yeah.
Yeah, one of my phrases is 7 supernovas to 7 supernovas. If it took 7 supernovas to make the elements that are in your body.
Yeah.
And someday, I hope all the elements in my body go through some 7 more. We're working on a very human time scale, and we're attached on that time scale. But the universe is still in motion, doing what the universe does. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lightness. There's a lightness to that. There's something from Buddha that talks about, and I used to have it at the bottom of my email, act as if what you do matters and laugh at yourself for thinking that it does. And there's so much wisdom in that of holding it as if it does matter. Maybe there is something there, but it's also silly to think that you could ever know enough to know that it is that. Yeah. So for some people, that's the thing. For others, it's other worldview problems. Is it really you against me? Okay, that might be true of this apple that's sitting in the space between us. Either you're going to get it or I'm going to get it, or we're going to split it in half, or we're going to decide to, make a tree or, and grow more apples together. What other options are there? Does it have to be that way? So I would love to do more to tease out the us-theming that happens. It just doesn't, in most cases, feel useful to do the us-theming, right? Most of the time, there's some third way that can be found that's transformational for everybody and can be win-wins for everybody. So let's look for those instead of
yes. Mm-hmm. So with the third way, you take them out of the polarity.
Yes. So I met this woman, Tree Bresson, in Oregon, and she does intentional community work. Mm-hmm. And so she facilitates and mediates for intentional communities. And on her refrigerator was this wheel that you could spin, and it had different pieces on there, like the president, the dog, the weather, and then all the roommates. And so if you were mad that the dishes weren't done, you could just spin the wheel and be like, it's the weather's fault that the dishes are not done, or whatever. And I just loved that. Yeah. And so a year or so ago, I was talking to my friend Melissa, and she's a bit of a tinkerer. And I was saying, sometimes people think it's the food that they've eaten, or the stars weren't aligned, or it's social dynamics or whatever. And so we started making up this wheel of blame that was all the different things that, all the different ontologies that we have about how the world works that explain why things go wrong, and you just spin it and go, it's group dynamics.
Yeah, and then we can spin it so hard, it spins out of control, look at it. It's all of it now.
All of these things simultaneously, it's just causality is not simple. Stop trying to make it overly simple.
Yes.
And that feels like what's happening in the us-theming. Is I've oversimplified the other person and it's their fault, or they're going to take it from me, and it's not that simple.
Yes, exactly. So if you were to look at the conditions for thrivability that are really essential.
Laughter. Living in paradox, getting people more comfortable with being in paradox. It's not this, it's not that. It's in some cases both. And looking for that third way.
Yeah.
There's a piece that I've been working on, that was started by looking at holacracy around everybody in the organization is a sense organ. Mm-hmm. I'm a taste bud, you're a fingertip, you're the toes, you're the eardrum, whatever, we're all sensing.
Yeah.
And when we hold it that way, everybody in the organization or everybody in society is a sense organ, then we can start to leverage that. Okay, so what are you sensing? And what do we want to do with that sensing? together.
Mm.
And so instead of being like against somebody else because they're sensing something different than you, what is it to come to the table and go, well, let's just sense together.
Yes.
And the eardrum is not, it might be sensing something different, but that doesn't make the taste bud wrong, right?
Exactly. And then there's also the understanding with that it enriches these different capacities to sense in different ways. Isn't it? So when you were touching on the paradox, if you go a little bit deeper into that, are the conditions for our thrivability that are the same conditions as for our collapse? One is the backside of the other.
I mean, like theoretically, I'm going absolutely. As I said earlier, you can't know in any moment whether something's really thrivable because you don't have all time and all space to measure all the different factors that go into thriving. So there's a way in which you couldn't know. Our collapse could be the most thrivable thing. I do have a lived sense of only in the space of the threat of collapse will we do the things necessary, right? Are we constrained enough that we will take the steps that we need to take?
Yes, exactly. Yes. And holding it that way, would you say that shifts a huge barrier, conceptual barrier?
Holding it or not holding it that way?
Holding it from that perspective, that understanding. So that means embracing the paradox in which you just said, yeah? And that by only accepting also that we are at that point of collapse. That we embrace.
I totally do this around Trump in the US. Having Trump here, it's like we have a whole bunch of brittle systems in place. The EPA is a brittle system in place, and it really needed to be broken in order to be created in a more organic and effective fashion. And only in a world of Trump are we capable of breaking all the systems that we need to break in order to build up ones that are better for us.
Yeah, so he's really a Trump card.
Yes.
You play cards, you have
My heart still breaks over the amount of suffering that will happen, and I just have to hold in mind that the suffering in the long term is less than the suffering in the short term to get to that level of transformation.
Now, yes, and I'm sensing what you're saying, and you're embracing the paradox, because you're holding it still from the potentials of what can become, even though we don't know yet, yeah? I could see that if people don't hold that wisdom, there can also be getting accustomed to difficulties, pain, and suffering as a way to justify it. So then you're not working with it. You're giving it a place rather than working with it to wake you up. How can people feel that fine balance?
I come at that question from a completely bizarre angle, which has to do with the dance between coaching and Buddhism. And so Buddhism just feels like this: accept what is, be in the present. It is what it is. Like, just deeply embrace that. There's no need for any action, right? There's just like, really be. And then coaching is this always striving. What could be better? What could be better? How could we improve? And to do both of those simultaneously, to be utterly present with what is, while also, what can I do? But it's coming at that from a playful angle of like, because I can, because it's fun, because why not? Instead of, I need to, I'm not enough.
Yes.
Right? So does that, it's just what came to me in answer to your question. Did it actually answer your question?
Yeah, because what you just explained, or even the energy with which you express, but because I can, that comes from a healthy sense of self. It's a healthy self. It's not a needy self. Whereas the other one is there's a lot of need. There's a lot of that drives that then. Okay, interesting. Nice. So for the next question then, what does going...
Are you done yet?
We're not done yet. No, I'm still playing with you. Guess what?
Are you having fun?
I'm having fun. Oh, yes. So what does going into the heart of systems change mean to you?
One of the guys that holds for that, he's a little curmudgeonly, but really brilliant. And he keeps holding for the living systems thing. And then he'll ask something like, you're modeling this off nature, but nature can actually be quite cruel. Do we want to be cruel? Right? If you're looking at like predatory chains, like if you're going to model off nature, you could be a predator. Like, and you would say, that's what nature does. Mm. Do we want to be doing that? And he keeps asking that kind of question. It's like, modeling off of nature is not enough. We have this capacity to feel, and how are we being in honor of that? Mm. So I think of that. Mm. And then I think of Genpo Roshi's work on Big Mind. Do you know Big Mind?
Yes.
And I love voice dialogue work. I think voice dialogue work is some of the best tools out there. It's just so helpful to get people to parse out, or groups to parse out the different voices that are happening, and be able to then mediate between those voices. But it goes from big mind to big heart, and to hold and to feel. But from that spiritual layer, not from my own individual projections that I might put into my heart, but in the, like, big heart comes after big mind. Mm-hmm. It is a feeling of the universe, or on behalf of the universe. Yes. And so that's the other place I go when you say the heart of social change. So I guess my answer is to move beyond just living systems into heart-based systems. Yeah. What does that even mean?
Yeah.
And I'm waiting for the day that thrivability has transcended itself.
Yeah.
And that could be something that goes beyond thrivability.
Yes.
For me. The feeling together.
Yeah. Yes. Beautiful. So the last question I'll play with you is your message to humanity now, and the future generations as well, the ones that have not been born yet.
What I wrote as my notes for you was, playfully strive toward what we want instead of resisting what we don't. And even that feels like a resistance. Like the snake biting its tail. And maybe this has not been present in my work all along, but is becoming very present in my work now, is how important that playfulness and laughter is for the healing, and for the connection, for the creativity. Because if we actually hold the traumas that humanity has gone through for the last 10,000 years, and we try and honor or like recover from that straight up, it's immense, and everybody is carrying a piece of it. Like, it is utterly overwhelming.
Yeah.
And it feels like the only way to transcend that is to bring some lightness and love and playfulness to our connection, right? And I don't know what that is. And then the other thing that comes up for me is, we haven't talked about awe and wonder.
Yeah.
And so I'm in a really playful mood today, but the other things that I often talk about around thrivability is awe and wonder. And the magical thing about awe is how it places us in the universe as a small piece of something larger, but still a small piece. Like, it doesn't disappear the person.
Yeah. But
it makes you a small piece of something larger. And we're just wired for that sense of belonging and connection that awe gives us. you're staring up at the Milky Way and it's a clear night, and man, those stars are just overwhelming in how beautiful they are. And that relationship that you feel of like me and all those stars is just so exquisite. And there's a gift in there and how to be in the world. To dance in that space of awe and wonder and play. And so that's my invitation.
Beautiful.
Cultivate those three things.
So these three things, exactly. So if you, from that place of awe and wonder, if you were to sense into these beautiful souls that are not here yet, yeah, future generations and not yet born, but they are already in the field somehow. They just haven't become these beings yet. Do you feel? In what way can we best support their experience?
Like, I'm doing the best that I can, given my stuff, to support what that is. But what they actually need, I don't know. And I want to go into a little bit of like how I relate to my children.
Yeah.
I have two kids. One's 15 and one's 17. And I'll do something with them. I bring them breakfast in bed. And they'll be like, wow, Mom, you're really enabling me. And I'm like, I know, but my father came in and said, get up, half the day's wasted. And I hated that experience. And I want you to know that I love you no matter what. And I want you to have a different experience. And so you might decide that enabling was not a good experience for you and that you will ask your child to be up at 8 o'clock in the morning. That's your choice. But my choice is to bring you breakfast in bed because, for God's sakes, you should have some kindness when you can.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
My mom is delighted to give you this kindness. So that's what matters to me. And so I know that I'm operating from the conditions in which I arose.
Yeah.
Can only imagine supporting to the degree that I know what I would have needed or wanted. And so I can sort of imagine that for my kids, but they're already laughing at me because they don't know what it's like not to feel loved, right? Like, I didn't feel loved. I felt like no matter what I did, I would not get that kind of thing. And so that was important to me to give them. No matter what, they are loved as they are today. Not some future potential self, but today's version of themselves.
Yes.
But they know that. And so they're like, I don't understand why that would even be important.
I have no idea what it is to be without that. That's given, like, of course.
Exactly. And so when you're like, what would they need for the conditions to support their thing? I'm like, I have no idea. And I hope they don't need what I needed.
Yes.
Because they're moving in the right direction.
Yes.
So if I just keep healing the things that I have and being a locus of transformation of the wounds that I carry, and I keep striving for awe and wonder, then the next generation will be slightly better, I hope. And they too will say, the buck stops here with that trauma. Healing begins here. And so the future generations will, like, that's the closest I can get to what can I do to support? Because I have no idea where they're going to be. And I hope to God it's further along down the evolutionary chain.
Yes.
And the healing that's needed, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Very good.